the starting point, I guess you could go back to the late 1990s, with Bill Clinton sitting in the White House and Hillary as our First Lady. They monetized their position, their official government positions, right? It was a criminal enterprise being run out of the White House. And they only sort of improved on it from there in the sense of using their official positions for their own benefit and personal wealth, lining their pockets, leveraging their government positions.
Welcome to the Herland Report. Chris Farrell, you are with the Judicial Watch. You've been on the board of directors for the Judicial Watch for many, many years. You are a distinguished military graduate from Fordham University and also a military intelligence officer specializing in counterintelligence and human intelligence. And we're discussing the great work of Judicial Watch. We would argue the most important public watchdog here in the United States at the moment, investigating government corruption and the misuse of power among the elites. We've taken a great interest in reading the Judicial Watch findings pertaining to the Hillary Clinton scandal, pertaining to the Benghazi investigation that first started that whole thing off.
Yep. So, the starting point, I guess you could go back to the late 1990s, with Bill Clinton sitting in the White House and Hillary as our First Lady. They monetized their position, their official government positions, right? It was a criminal enterprise being run out of the White House. And they only sort of improved on it from there in the sense of using their official positions for their own benefit and personal wealth, lining their pockets, leveraging their government positions. And so no one should be surprised that as you move forward in the period where Hillary Clinton becomes Secretary of State, a couple things are of interest. Number one, she establishes her outlaw private server the week before she is sworn in as Secretary of State. And that was done, at least in my opinion, with foreknowledge that they were going to do everything they could to dodge our open records law, what we refer to as the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. And so there's this sort of guilty foreknowledge, this willful intent to avoid that law, to avoid public records. The other thing that I think is critical is that as part of sort of the deal to get her the position of Secretary of State, she had to agree to a disclosure plan wherein her husband's foundation and all of his activities had to be sort of deconflicted and disclosed, meaning if he was going to run around the world giving speeches, well, then there had to be a process by which the State Department was informed of his activity, and the State Department would confirm or assent that he could do that. There's something like 247, I think that's the number, I might be off by a little bit, but there's a couple of hundred instances where Bill Clinton was conducting activities overseas with foreign corporations, foreign governments, foreign prominent business leaders, et cetera, where he was either providing a speech or consulting or showing up at a board meeting, all these different venues and events, either him acting personally or acting on behalf of the Clinton Foundation, where these activities had to be vetted or approved or signed off on by the State Department. That was a condition of Hillary Clinton's employment as a Secretary of State. There had to be this process. So she goes forward and becomes Secretary. We have all these documents. Interestingly enough, guess who the reviewing authority was with respect to Bill Clinton's activities and whether they could be done or not done? Well, Cheryl Mills, her chief of staff, her attorney. She's the one who was reviewing all these. And out of the 247 or so, guess how many were approved? All of them. So it's a very cozy little racket. There's the illusion of transparency and double check and sort of an offset to make sure that everything's on the up and up. And in reality, this is just sort of an inside deal. So there's those sorts of behaviors, that sort of conduct going on. Again, monetizing, leveraging their official position for personal gain. The Clinton Foundation and the Secretary of State's office, there is virtually no daylight between the two. We have emails of Huma Abedin, Mrs. Clinton's personal assistant, her aide for decades now, communicating with people at the Clinton Foundation to arrange for phone calls and meetings. Clinton Foundation and people sending Huma Abedin emails saying, hey, this person's a big donor. Make sure that she calls, meaning Hillary Clinton calls back. All of this is documented. All the paperwork is on our website. You can go to judicialwatch.org and read for yourself all these instances where there's no, like I said, there's no daylight. There's no separation between the Clinton Foundation and all the fundraising activity that goes on there and Hillary Clinton operating as Secretary of State. And you have to ask yourself, well, whose interests are being served in that regard? How many hundreds of millions of dollars went into the Clinton Foundation where the Secretary of State's office was simply the vehicle to get that to them?
And the question of the pay-for-play system.
Well, that's the very definition of it.
I do believe you have laws here in the United States against that kind of system, and this is precisely the problem in the so-called third world countries, African countries, South America, many places. This is the precise issue that causes the kind of corruption that for the African segment, for example, I'm an African, born and raised in Africa. What really tears Africa apart is the corruption among the elites, because it means that justice is not served for the citizens. It becomes a question of who has the money, is the one that's going to win the cases and going to reach the politicians. And seeing that kind of system enter into the United States through the implementation of the Clinton Foundation, as you have unraveled in your work at Judicial Watch.
And I'll give you an exact example demonstrating what you just said. There's a Prince of Bahrain had sought a meeting with Mrs. Clinton. In the email to Huma Abedin, her personal assistant, from the Clinton Foundation, they even say, the normal process hasn't worked. In other words, this prince had made an approach to the State Department saying, I wish to have an interview or a meeting with Mrs. Clinton. I want to discuss the following topics. And for whatever reason, the organs of the state said no, or she's not available, or perhaps later, whatever. He was put off in some way. And so the regular process, the regular order of things, the legal method didn't work. And so here's, I believe it was Doug Band, who's the gentleman at the Clinton Foundation. I believe it's an email from him to Huma Abedin saying, well, the regular process didn't work, so we need to get him in to see her. I mean, that is the very definition of exactly what you were talking about. It's an abusive process. It's an abuse of the law. It's pay to play. It's special access for high-dollar people to gain advantage, within the government, or to exploit the government authority to benefit somebody for money. It's the definition of corruption.
And this is where my country, Norway, comes into the picture, because when you revealed precisely the documents, the Hillary Clinton documents, and when you have looked into the Clinton Foundation, you did find that there were 3 foreign states that were the highest bidders and payers into the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah, I think, if my memory serves, I think Norway, they gave something like 3/4 of their foreign assistance budget to the Clinton Foundation. And the question is, look, Norway is a very sophisticated, very educated country with a very elaborate foreign policy system and government and a long history. How is it that the Norwegian people, the Norwegian government, they're not capable of deciding where their foreign assistance should go? Do they really need to filter it through the Clinton Foundation? Is that in the best interests of the people of Norway? Are they best represented by that? It's crazy. I mean, you cannot explain it away. Somebody was seeking a favor or benefit to take 3/4 of all of Norway's foreign assistance and funnel it through the Clinton Foundation. Who benefits?
It was remarkable because it was Norway, I do believe, and then Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And Norway, of course, being the Qatar of Europe. Oil
I never
rich.
heard it described that way. That's funny.
Oil rich and gas wealth and all of that. So it's understandable that the world's elites would like to be friends with us, although it could be argued whether that would benefit the Norwegian people that owns this wealth. But it's remarkable to watch also how many Norwegian officials, prime ministers and others who have taken office recently. I mean, we're just a nation of 6 million people, and we have people high up. We have the NATO Secretary General,
Right.
and that is also something that we look at when considering the degree of the amounts of money that went straight from us and our government to Hillary Clinton, and also noting that the moment Hillary Clinton was not elected president, that same moment was when we stopped funding the Clinton Foundation. How do you interpret that?
Well, at the starting point, it's unimaginable to me that a very sophisticated, very educated government, country, culture that Norway is would somehow delegate its foreign assistance, the decision-making, to some foundation in the United States. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I think Norwegians can figure out where their money should go, who they want to help, and how. So, to me, it looks only like some sort of a, pay-to-play, access, favoritism, benefit. It rings so hollow. It is such a, I don't know how the Norwegian people stand for it. I don't know how people in your own foreign ministry aren't insulted by it. What, they can't figure out what to do with their foreign assistance money? It's mind-boggling. It just makes no sense. And the fact that it shuts off the minute Hillary Clinton is not elected, what does that tell you? And people can draw their own conclusions. This is not tough to figure out. But who was behind it? Who authorized it? Who wrote the check? Who signed the authorization? That's the question to ask.
What we're basically discussing here as well is some of the elements that you discover at Judicial Watch that gives information on a whole other story than what we hear from the mainstream media.
Right.
And this is what we want for our governments, to have some level of honesty. After all, we profess to be democratic, we profess to be liberal, and we profess to be something else than the dictatorships and the autocracies that we see. And we profess also to have civil liberties such as free speech and rights, the Bill of Rights. So it's due to that your work at Judicial Watch becomes even more important as you uncover government corruption in this time. To what degree would you say that the globalist transnational business model system is taking over democracy in America?
I don't know that it's taking over democracy in America. I think it's a threat to democracy. I think that people that resist scrutiny and accountability, it's almost lost meaning because the word transparency is thrown around so much. There's lots of ways to kind of phony up transparency. The best way not to do that is to provide documentation, right? People sometimes think that if you talk a good game, that's transparency. It's not. I can remember we protested loudly when the Bush administration, the second George W. Bush administration, decided that they were no longer going to release records of persons who entered the White House grounds. They're called WAVES logs. It's an acronym, but it's the entry log to the White House. And they did so under the guise of saying, well, look, this is a post-9/11 world and we can't reveal all these persons. And so they still maintained logs, but they moved them from an outside agency or department that was subject to the Open Records Law into the White House, which is not subject to it. Well, then the Obama administration came in behind Bush, and they talked a great game about transparency and revealing everything. They actually made it worse, right? They doubled down. They made access to White House visitor logs even more restrictive. And then they lied like hell, saying, oh, well, we've released everything, and we've made some selective edits, of course, but we released everything. And so if you're not going to give it to me and you tell me you're not, okay, I can dislike it, but at least it's sort of honest in the sense that we can argue and disagree, but it is what it is. What's horribly dishonest and really very disingenuous is to claim the mantle of transparency and then actually make it worse and talk a good game. And so there's this guy who was the White House ethics czar. He asked us to come over to a meeting, said, hey, look, we really would appreciate it if you didn't sue to get these records because we really don't want to. And the guy said, look, we'll hold a really good press conference and say what a great organization you are, but just don't sue us. And myself and my two colleagues at Judicial Watch, and we looked at each other and, no. There's a law, there's a process, we're going to follow it. We're not interested in your sort of veiled promise or bribe or whatever you want to call it. We've made a claim, we believe we have access. If you don't give it to us, we're going to sue. Then a judge can decide whether it's sufficient or not. But we're going to exercise the process. We're going to try to have accountability. We're going to show the public how we went about this. And we're not interested in your press conference. And we're not interested in playing ball to go along to satisfy your political objectives. But this is a snapshot of Washington, right? This is how business is done in this town. We want no part of it. And I've been at Judicial Watch now for 20 years. We don't forget, we don't stop, we don't quit. And that's just the way we operate. And sometimes people think that's great, and sometimes they're frustrated by it, but those are our principles. And we are a principles over politics organization, and we always will be that way.
And on that note, thank you very much, Chris Farrell, Director at Judicial Watch, for participating here at the Herland Reporting, discussing the vital matters of American current affairs.
Thanks.